This is Mark Lichty. I'm Chair of Active Surveillance Patients International. I'm here with Mike Scott, who is the awardee, and who we're just kind of having an informal discussion here. And Mike, Mike's journey and my journey were so different, and Mike's is fascinating, and that's why he's getting this award. And he'll speak to that. He's a man that has dedicated him to the service of men with prostate cancer, even though he never had prostate cancer, and he'll speak of that. But my journey was exactly the opposite. I was diagnosed 20 years ago, and our father died of prostate cancer, but uh, it's my father that inspired me to not have treatment 20 years ago. 20 years ago, when what I did, not having treatment, was still called watchful waiting, which really made me uncomfortable because I didn't want to just watch and wait. And then a couple of years later, we came up, the industry, I'll call it the prostate industry, came up with the term active surveillance, which I liked a lot better. And now, by the way, we at ASPI call what we're doing peaceful vigilance, because you all on active surveillance can achieve peace. You can all reach a state of peace with prostate cancer. I mean, we're not just about preserving your quality of life. We know you can do that, but it's also about the fact that you can have a perfectly peaceful existence with prostate cancer. Uh, and This award is called the Advocacy Award, but it was named after one of our co-founders, Thron Torvalds, and one of the sweetest men that you would ever want to meet. He's Icelandic, and last year he received the award, and we named the award now after him, the Thron Torvalds Award. And I'd encourage you all, if you get who view this, if you go to our award recordings, it was a wonderful presentation last year. And so I have to say about Mike here that he was a very reluctant awardee. He's a humble man. And I'm not going to say I almost had to twist his arm to accept the award, but his humility was manifest, and that's one of his better traits. I don't know all of his traits, but we'll say that's one of his better traits. But and you all know, I imagine you follow our webinars, but you know we're about trying to help you folks avoid overtreatment from prostate cancer. And now we're trying to help you avoid over biopsying and overly invasive monitoring. The whole process of monitoring is dynamic and growing and improving all of the time, and that's you've been blessed with this disease of prostate cancer at a good time, a time when there's much knowledge being gained. But I think now I'd like to introduce Paul Schellheimer. Paul is past president of the American Urological Association and has a long history, a background with Mike. I don't have that same background, and so and Mike has said about Paul, he's one of the nicest urologists that Mike has ever met. And I'll say that when I've spoken with Paul, I kind of concur with that. So, Paul, do you have a few words so we can get a better picture of who Mike is?
Well, yes, and thank you for your kind words as well. And it's an honor to introduce Mike Scott, or speak about him as the recipient of the Patient Advocacy Award named after Dr. Thorvaldsen. And I'll say I first met Mike probably 40 plus years ago when discussions were being held about how to treat advanced prostate cancer beyond the traditional surgical castration. And in these meetings, I heard this young gentleman with a clipped British accent asking probing and thought-provoking questions. And I said to myself, gee, where did he train in urology? And where does he practice urology? I've got to introduce myself to him, which I did. And I learned that Mike was not an MD, but that didn't diminish in any aspect my admiration for his knowledge of the field and his ability to ask the right questions. And at the time, he was beginning to talk about this active surveillance modality that was just being introduced beyond the watchful waiting that had been long in practice for men with far advanced or men who were very elderly with advanced disease. This was a new idea for young men with newly diagnosed prostate cancer who might not need active treatment because of low-risk disease. And at the meetings about active surveillance, he would ask me what I thought. And I would say, Mike, what do you know and what do you think? And over the decades, Mike has run a number of very informative meetings for physicians and for patients to clarify this new concept, to answer the questions. And he's been a very facile and diligent facilitator to make certain both sides discuss and speak with one another so there is clarity to the strategy and the situation. And he ran a website, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with, that surveyed the recent literature and asked the questions and allowed through a portal for the patients to converse with him about these strategies. So when ASPI said, we are thinking about nominating Mike Smith for a Patient Advocacy Award, I applauded, agreed wholeheartedly. And Mike, I certainly offer my congratulations for award well deserved. I'm delighted to be here to witness your receipt of it. And with that, I am going to pass the program to Howard Walensky. Howard?
Well, thanks, Paul. And good morning, everybody. I'm going to start off with a bit of shtick from Shakespeare, one of Mike's countrymen. Friends, fellow patients, and advocates, lend me your ears. And to twist Mark Antony's speech, I'm here to praise Mike Scott, not to bury him. Because Mike Scott's game has gone on for a long time and it's not over. I can safely say that if it wasn't for Mike Scott, we would not be gathered here today. The prostate cancer world would be a totally different world without Mike's vision and hard work. And I would describe his vision as supervision. In fact, he has superpowers. He can leap over a tall building in a single bound. He can see around corners and see chess moves far into the future. I have a feeling that back in the 1990s, when he started this work, he could probably see us gathered here today to praise him for his work in picking up the signals about a public health disaster, one of the worst of all time, that was occurring in prostate cancer, the overdiagnosis and overtreatment of lower risk prostate cancers that were ruining the quality of life. And as Paul Schellhammer said, giving men one-way tickets to surgery and radiation that they didn't need. Mike is unusual because he didn't have a dog in this fight, unlike most of us. He saw a problem and set out to do something about it. He's a true hero in my mind, and excuse me if I get a bit emotional about this, it's not something I usually do. He was a true advocate for those of us with low-risk prostate cancer. He read the signals of what was going on from the likes of the late Jerry Chodak of the University of Chicago, who was ASPI's first medical advisor. He also took in the signals from Peter Albertson of the University of Connecticut and Dr. Lawrence Klotz of the University of Chicago, both of whom have been award recipients for the Chodak Award from ASPI. And also from Peter Carroll, who soon will be a recipient of the Chodak Award. Mike was shrewd. He started Prostate Cancer International and tapped into the emerging power of the internet. He became an expert on prostate cancer research. He could even fool these doctors into thinking he was one of them because he knew so much. He started the first website and a blog, Ask Arthur, a question and answer column on prostate cancer there. And he ran an early support group for men with low-risk prostate cancer, where he was an advisor, almost a father confessor to men on active surveillance. His work led to the formation of other groups, including Zero. In 2016, I was invited to do a blog on my experiences as a patient with low-risk prostate cancer by Peggy Peck, the founding editor of MedPage Today. Peggy and I are old friends from the medical journalism world. She was a lurker in my Facebook mini blog, and she picked up on my experiences being a patient. And she suggested that I write for her. And I was reluctant because I figured the doctors knew everything. And I just was, a learner on a road not taken. But she said, you're wrong. Now, funny enough, Mike picked up on my work and he started sharing my stories in MedPage Today. And, I can't say Mike agreed with me always, but he had honest disagreements and he had conviction and he was willing to speak openly where he thought I was right and where he thought I was wrong. And I respect him greatly for that and for everything that he's done. Next thing you know, Mike was at it again. He submitted my name, one of several, to be the first patient speaker at the American Society of Clinical Oncology in 2017 in Orlando. I was picked to speak. Maybe that was ASCO's first mistake. They made another one. They inadvertently handed me a gift that changed my life. And again, everything traces back to Mike. I was on a stage with eminent urologists and researchers, but somehow they forgot to call on me. And the program was about an hour in, and I finally couldn't wait anymore because I knew time was going to run out. So I literally grabbed the mic with permission and went on a 7-minute rant about what was wrong with the optics of this, that they invited a patient to speak, tell his story, and then forgot him. It didn't look right. And I said, and that's the problem. The doctors were not listening to the patients, and I was a living example. I learned something that I didn't know about myself, thanks to Mike. I learned that I could do public speaking, and I learned that I could rant, and I feel like I'm ranting now. But that rant was like the theses nailed on the church wall by Luther. I got a lot of attention for this, and I became sort of an underground figure without even knowing it in the prostate cancer world. The 2,500 people in the audience were stunned that I would be speaking out like this. And then I heard from Throne Thorvaldsson, a visionary patient advocate in Iceland, of all places, who heard about my confrontation and asked me if there were support groups in the US focused on surveillance. He had started one in Little Iceland and was hoping to join forces. Well, I looked into this for my med page column, and I found that that there weren't such groups. So almost on a lark, I said to Thrum, why don't we start a group? He'd heard about me at the Prostate Cancer Research Institute from other patients who had read my story about what happened at the ASCO meeting. And several doctors wrote about this too. So the word was getting out. And again, it was Mike's dabbling that led to this. And so Throne and I started to make plans, and Throne went to the PCRI meeting in California where he met up with Mark Lichty and Gene Slattery. And so the four of us started what is now ASPI. Mike has been, he spots opportunities and knows how to exploit them. I mean that in a good way. He saw us forming this group. We were originally going to have our first meeting in Iceland. Honestly, I wanted to go there for a honeymoon 50 years ago, but my wife wouldn't let me or let us. At any rate, so we started working on this, and Mike was planning in parallel a research project of physicians who we had invited as speakers. All the big names in the field agreed to join us, but we had some logistical errors of the kind that young organizations have, and so it fell apart. But we kept going, and Mike kept with his vision, and he actually finally worked with us and others and developed a research study on the future of active surveillance, working with Dr. Minhaj Siddiqui at the University of Maryland. And so Mike doesn't speak loudly, but he carries a silent big stick, and he is still shaping things. And at the University of Maryland, he started a patient advocacy education program with experts there. And I went through the program, and I probably learned everything I needed to know, but it inspired me. And I'm at my gentle age of 76, entering my second year as a MPH student at the University of Illinois at Chicago. I don't think this course is online. Most of my fellow students probably don't know that I'm 50 years older than them, and most of them are medical students, or some are actually practicing physicians. So I'm almost done. I can't praise Mike any more than I have, but I should note he isn't a one-trick pony. He helped to put out the fire created by unnecessary aggressive treatment of low-risk prostate cancer, but he's worked similar miracles for myeloma. So I'm going to turn the floor over to, I think, Mark again. But I expect Mike is going to tell us what he sees is going to happen in the next 30 years. But Mike, if you can tell us what's going to happen in the next 5 to 10 years, that'll work too.
Well, thank you, Howard. Thank you. And thank you.
Did I bring tears?
I had a couple. Well, thank you so much too for your work with Active Surveillor and just sticking with it. You more than anybody have touched so many lives. And I was going to suggest that it probably would have been in bad taste for you to go on your honeymoon to Iceland without Judy.
Well, it was one of those deals.
So I think that was a good decision.
We went to Jamaica instead, and I got the worst sunburn I had in my life. I had like a third degree burn, but we can save that.
I will save that. Anyway, so It is really my honor and my privilege, Mike, to present this award to you. And I want to hold the award up to the screen because a lot of thought went into this award. I designed the award, the Throne Torvaldsen Award, to really show the importance of the patient-doctor communication and how that is evolving, how in years past you just deferred to the doctor, but now the doctors are very much embracing shared decision making. Patients are very much willing to speak openly, willing to bring articles to their doctor and have open discussions about what do I do about prostate cancer? Should I go on active surveillance or not? So that whole area of the technology is improving, but the whole area of communication is improving as well. And so, Mike, by the way, this award was done by was painted by a very dear friend of mine, Kathy Lockwood. And so it's a real honor for me to present this award to you, Mike. And I am going to remove myself from the screen and focus the camera just on you. So we'd love to hear some words of wisdom from you.
So, Paul, Howard, Mark, thank you very much indeed for this award. I am truly honored. As you all know, I'm not somebody who likes to spend a lot of time thinking about how important what I do is, because I don't think it is that important. You need to understand that I am an accidental prostate cancer advocate. One of my staff, I worked for many years in health and science communications, nearly 40 something years. And one of the staff who worked for me walked into my office one day in the late 1990s, well, mid 1990s, and said, "Have you heard of Netscape?" And I said no. But he was a smart kid and he got us all using email and, started some other things that were important at that time. And he said, "Well, I'll come back and show you in a few months." So just before Christmas, and I think it was Christmas 1994, he walked back into my office with his computer, put it down on my desk and said, "I want to show you Netscape." And he did. And my immediate reaction was, oh my goodness, that wasn't the word I used. We can actually finally communicate healthcare information directly to patients. And you need to remember that before the internet, the only way that the average patient could get healthcare information was from his doctor's office or from a medical library. And 90% of America don't live anywhere near a medical library, and their choice of doctor is very limited. So being able to use the internet to provide healthcare information directly to an individual patient was a huge opportunity. And I was in the business of healthcare communication, so I needed to learn how to do this. It so happened that shortly before that, I'd started to meet people like Paul Schellhammer, because I was working on projects which were about the changing nature of the diagnosis and management of prostate cancer. So I took all of that knowledge and all of that information and all the people I knew and decided I would build a prostate cancer website, and everybody told me I was out of my mind. And I said, no, I don't think so, because the people who have prostate cancer are largely retired. They have the time to want to learn about it. And they also may have the money to be able to afford to buy a computer. So I don't think I've got much to lose. And basically for the next something like 25 to 30 years, I attempted to provide prostate cancer patients and those at risk with prostate cancer with a way to obtain reasonably easily access to the latest information about the diagnosis and treatment of this disease. At the same time, I was discovering that, in fact, something like 50% of the men who can be found to have prostate cancer, let's say they get killed in a car accident and they have an autopsy, 50% of those men in their 50s would be found to have prostate cancer in their body, largely in their prostate. But they didn't die of it. And there was a slightly crazy urologist at the University of Chicago called Jerry Chodak, who had an opinion about everything and wasn't afraid of sharing it, who was simultaneously saying to his peers, we probably shouldn't be treating everybody we're treating for prostate cancer. So taking this information to heart, I started to read even more, and I started to talk to pathologists who specialized in prostate cancer at places like Stanford and Johns Hopkins. And I learned that this was in fact true, that prostate cancer was not necessarily an aggressive form of cancer, and that most of the significant period of time, and many of them would not actually have metastatic disease at all. And then a gentleman called Peter Albertson at the University of Connecticut published data from the Connecticut mortality registries and pathology registries showing that this was in fact completely true. At the same time, the people at Johns Hopkins had learned how to put together data using Gleason scores and PSA data to categorize people into risk levels. And so we started to be able to say to patients, if you have low risk, you may not immediately want to get treated. I can't tell you whether it's right or wrong. I can tell you that if you do get treated early, your risk for side effects is significant. And I'm not going to tell any particular patient, and I have never told any particular patient you should or shouldn't have treatment, not have treatment, have active surveillance. But what I've always said to patients is you need to understand what all of your options are. You need to be able to ask your doctor intelligent questions about those options. And you need to come to a decision that you will not regret later. In other words, if you have evaluated all of your options and then decided to do something, you must feel that even if it goes wrong, you will have said to yourself, I did all the things that I could do to make the right decision. It just turned out to be the wrong one. That's life, it happens. So as things have got more sophisticated and we've learned about PET scans and MRI scans and genetics and race and all of the other things that actually affect an individual patient's risk for prostate cancer, starting with the fact that if you have two grandparents who had prostate cancer and your father, your chances of having aggressive prostate cancer are pretty high. We have become a great deal better at being able to say to a patient, you have several possible choices depending on your risk level. And the important thing for a newly diagnosed man with prostate cancer is to understand his risk level. After that, he can come to decisions about what he wants to do. But if you don't understand that primary risk level, very low, low, medium but slightly low, medium but slightly high, and then high or very high, you will not make good decisions about what you want to do. You need to understand those risk levels. And when you start talking to a urologist because your primary care person tells you you may have prostate cancer, you need to talk to that urologist about how do we find out what my risk level is before you decide to do anything else. I am delighted that one of the other awards, the Chodak Award that ASPI is giving out this year, is going to go to the people from the PROTECT trial in the United Kingdom. Dr. Hamdi and his colleagues in the UK finally proved that the risk of being managed on active surveillance, which they call expectant management or active monitoring, is actually no worse if you have medium to low risk disease than it would be if you had surgery or radiation therapy. You will live for just as long a time, and your side effects will certainly be no worse, and you can have effective treatment later. This was what I had hoped might happen some 20 years earlier. But I knew how difficult it was going to be to do this. The trial is going on today and has lasted for more than 20 years already. It required something like 1,400, something like 1,600 patients to do it, which would never have happened in America because the patients would have been persuaded to have treatment rather than to enter the trial. But when the first results of that trial were announced at the AUA many years ago now, basically there was a room full of urologists, most of whom had their mouths open in shock, because nobody had really believed it. And I cannot express my thanks sufficiently to Dr. Hamdi and his colleagues for making that trial work. Because it was so essential. Now, if I'm honest, I will tell you that trial should be repeated in men of dark skin color today, because we still don't know if that is true for African Americans or Afro-Caribbeans or whatever else you might be. It would be incredibly hard to do that trial, but it should be done. We still need to learn more about risk levels and who is a good candidate for active surveillance and who is a really bad candidate. I believe that can be done, and I believe it will happen within the next 20 years, but it could take that long. There is a reason why physicians are slow to change their behavior. It is because all too often we tell physicians to do something new and they go and do it, and it turns out to be wrong. So physicians are very conservative, correctly so. Sometimes they can be too conservative and it takes too long for them to change their behavior. But I'll accept that risk. The classic case in point of that was that there was a gentleman who discovered that ulcers are caused by a bacterium, and it took something like 15 years for his research to be proved correct. I had told him at the time he published his first paper that he would get a Nobel Prize. He roared with laughter, and I was right. So I think I've said enough. I am very proud of this award. I never set out to receive awards. It's not part of who I am. But I am happy that I have helped some people to get more choices about this disease and others. And I have always believed passionately that patients are an integral part of their own care. If you are a patient, it is your responsibility to ask the doctor difficult questions and not just sit there and say, yes, doctor, no, doctor, 3 bags full, doctor. Good doctors will listen to you, and doctors are becoming much better at listening to their patients and achieving what we now call shared decision-making. So my thanks to ASPI. Again, my thanks to Bill Manning, to the other members of ASPI, and my thanks to Paul Schellhammer, who has been my good friend now for some 40 years. And I valued his advice incredibly over the years. And for me to have a friend who had been chairman of the American Urological Association was a very great honor to me. Thank you all.
Well, thank you. You know, you have given us a primer in prostate cancer and active surveillance. This should be a separate thing on our website, because somebody that is recently diagnosed could benefit greatly with the words that you've said here before. I did want to correct one thing that you did say in terms of what the PROTECT study found is that men on active surveillance and men that were treated, they'll live just about as long. But what we found recently in a recent study, that men that are going on active surveillance, because most of the men that are going on active surveillance decide, well, I'm going to make some lifestyle changes. I'm going to change my diet. I'm going to exercise, whatever they decide. They're living longer when they go on active surveillance. So this was a surprise to me as well.
Yeah, but that was not part of the
That
PROTECT
wasn't-
study's intentions.
that
They
was-
weren't doing any of it.
No, they weren't doing, that wasn't their thing, but it did come out subsequently that is the case, and another good argument for going on active surveillance. And in any event, thank you all for being here today with Mike. Well deserved.
Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you for your words.
You're welcome.
Take care.
Congratulations, Mike, and thanks for everything you've done and everything you will do.